let's start with what is the internet? And, for someone who might be joining the internet now in 2020 or 2023 or 2010 as a mature system with large applications, it might not be exactly obvious what the internet is or what it was designed to be. And what it was designed to be is very simple. It was designed to be a network of networks. The way to imagine it is to think that there was a time where people had a variety of their own networks within an office, within a government, within an academic institution. And those networks did not necessarily interoperate with each other, did not necessarily communicate with each other. And the idea behind the internet wasn't to build the one top-down network that everyone has to use. The idea was to allow people to make their networks interoperate with each other. A network of networks, not a network. And if you go back to 1972, famously, the internet was in some ways invented at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency of the United States government. And as the theory went back then, it was designed to create a communication network that would be resilient to a nuclear attack because it would be decentralized, because there wouldn't be one point of failure. And the original four concepts behind the internet were these following, and it goes to this theory of a network of networks. So we should actually read them, they're interesting. That each network had to stand on its own and no internal changes could be required of each network before being connected to the internet. So this makes sense if you communicate among your devices within your own network, in your house or business, you don't have to change how you do that so long as you then communicate in the standard-based way once you connect to the internet. Now, in practice, most internal networks now are also communicating in the similar way as the internet, but that was not and is not a design protocol. Second, communication is a best efforts exercise. So you try and move the packets forward. If it doesn't work, you retransmit, you try again. It gives redundancy, resilience. Quote unquote black boxes, and it's funny because now black boxes have been, it's entered the vernacular for a whole variety of usages. But what we mean really are the routers and the gateways connect the networks, and they're not content aware. They're a black box. They just move the data further down. And for our purposes, the last one's the most important, which is no global control at the operations level. There's no one place that is in charge of the internet. There's no CEO of the internet. There's no Internet Incorporated. There's not one person or function or organization whose permission you need to ask to use the internet. Why? Because the internet is not a thing in and of itself. It's a way for people's individual networks to communicate with each other. It is perfectly possible that, say, the University of Nicosia says, if you want to be on my internal network, you have to get the permission of the IT department. Makes sense. That's their network. But there's nobody whose permission you have to ask to start transmitting packets across the internet. And this has two implications. The first implication is that everything we're going to then talk about relating to decentralization is not some type of radical, anarchist thing that nobody has ever done before. This is quite literally how the internet works. And I'm pretty sure everyone agrees that the internet has been an immense boon to global society. The fact that we can communicate globally with each other in all types of ways is a huge plus for humanity. And then the second part is a huge reason the internet has become what the internet has become is because you do not need someone's permission to connect a server to the internet and start serving data. If this was, and I know it might be hard for people to conceptualize, but there was a time where before the app stores, and it's funny because the app stores are also permissioned, but it's even easier to think about it this way, where the phone carriers decided what applications would run on your phones. And so if you wanted to have, you made a new application, let's say you made WhatsApp, you'd have to go to AT&T and say, I would like to convince you to allow me to use WhatsApp uh, to install WhatsApp on the devices of your network. And AT&T is going to say, oh, cool. What does WhatsApp do? Oh, it's free text messaging, basically. Except it's better. It's better than text messaging. You can do pictures, you can do videos. AT&T is going to say, but this is going to compete with my text messaging service. And say, oh, yeah, it's better, in fact. People are going to like it more. And AT&T is going to say, well, you want me to sign off and give you access to all of my brand and customers and installed base so you can compete with me? And say, yeah, that sounds good, right? I say, go jump in a lake. Of course I'm not going to let you run on my network. Or let's say you're, I don't know, take the other end of the spectrum. You say, here's my application. Oh, what does your application do? Oh, you say, if you press this button here on my application, it makes farting sounds. Excuse me, what do you mean it makes farting sounds? You know, just fine. The phone will make a farting sound. You're now AT&T. Ma Bell, the glory of the American telecommunications industry. You say, you expect me under the AT&T brand to make available to my customers, the parents of America, the mothers and fathers of America. You want me to make available a farting app? I'll get fired. The board of directors will, someone will show a board member, they'll be shocked, horrified, and they'll fire me. Of course you can't have a farting app. And you might say, oh, I don't know, should the farting app exist? Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't, but the important point is, once you build these choke points in, they will be used for the purposes of the organization. They will be used for the purposes and business objectives of the organization. Whether they're like very serious business objectives, They don't want someone to compete with their text messaging service. Or maybe their indirect business objectives. The brand manager of AT&T or the CEO of AT&T thinks the AT&T brand stands for something, and that something doesn't include farts. The internet is not like that. You can connect to the internet, make a website, press a button on the website, and your website can make farting sounds. No one can tell you, oh, this is very brand inappropriate for the internet. We can't allow this. You're going to have to take this down. Because it's just a communication protocol. It's a way to connect the network. It's a network of networks. It's a way for networks to talk to each other. And the fact that we can do silly things, important things, things that seem silly but then turn out to be important. Twitter, to me, is the definitive example. Everyone thought Twitter was absurd at first, not that important. And now it's a major communication platform for presidents and prime ministers. But this was also true of Facebook. You can read things when Facebook first started. Oh, what a terrible idea. It's a platform for college kids who have no money and have nothing better to do to chat with each other. This doesn't sound very serious. If this was the public press at the beginning of Facebook, why would this be worth anything? Why does this matter? And so societies are better when they allow you to permissionally innovate. Because there will be many bad ideas. Right? Like Facebook and Twitter, Facebook and Twitter have survivorship bias. There were many, many ideas tried on the internet, most of which tried and failed. But the ones that succeeded changed the world. And those typically don't come from some central planning type function. They come from the marketplace of ideas. So one, I just made a utility-based case for society. Society will have better products and services if you let people permissionally innovate. But there's also a human dignity, human expression, human freedom case. A world where you're allowed to make a farting application. I specifically am picking that type of example, right? Obviously, if I picked an example that says a world where you're allowed to make a website to teach mathematics, I was like, oh, everyone's, of course, our centralized services are going to allow you to make websites to teach mathematics. How free a society is, how many rights and how much dignity you have as a citizen of society is when you're allowed to do things that poke fun of the people in power, are maybe not viewed as desirable by the people in power, are viewed as possibly not having dignity. This is how a free society operates, right? And so the internet, by its design, was a form of free society. Now, that design was designed that way for resiliency, more so than, I think, permissionless innovation. But those design choices that built that resiliency were also the same design choices that gave us permissionless innovation. And they gave us the internet we have today. It's very, very important, right? And everything, this is the basis for everything else we're going to talk about. It's not as if none of these things have been done before. They've been done. We use them every day. It's called the internet. And it works great. Now, this is like the good news. What's the bad news? Well, the internet at basically every level is centralizing. And this comes from all the way from the hardware and network layer all the way up, right? So from bottom up, you start with internet service providers. Most countries, or most locations in most countries, have a monopoly, a duopoly, or an oligopoly of service providers. And since they're the ones who are transmitting the packets for most people, they're a choke point. If it's hard to imagine what the alternative is, like, oh yeah, but I got to get internet from somewhere, right? I'm going to get Comcast or AT&T or what have you, right? How could it work a different way? Well, a different way, and this is not mature yet, but a different way would be what's called mesh networking, where even the physical communication is going peer-to-peer from device to device, that there is not one single point that says, this data can come through this point and this data cannot. You don't feel this so much in the West, but ISPs are a problem. You know, when Egypt was having its one of the various, you know, social movements, and people were coordinating through the internet, and Egypt has, I believe, and I can't say I'm an expert on Egyptian ISPs, but what I remember just reading the news there, the government at some point just shut down the internet for the whole country. They just called Egypt Telecom or whatever it's called and said, like, yeah, just shut it down. Oh, this is like bad for productivity. Well, yeah, sure. It's very bad for productivity. But on the other hand, we want the social movement to stop, so just turn off the internet. And because you had one service provider, you could turn it off. It's one level. Second level, cloud hosting. Cloud hosting is fantastic, right? I use Amazon Web Services for all types of things. It's convenient, it's fast, it's high performant, it has all types of features, it's less work, but it's a point of centralization. You see this sometimes when, you know, Amazon has data centers in different regions, and their big region is USA East. It's located in Northern Virginia. And if that region goes down, many of your favorite websites go down because they're all hosted there. Content delivery networks, CDNs. What do CDNs do? They store files close to the end user so they download quickly, so that the user experience is better. There's a handful of them. They also, in some cases, protect against what are known as DDoSs, distributed denial of service attacks. Again, these are very useful services that make the internet better day to day, but they are points of control because all of these are companies, right? And anything that is a company ultimately has a human in charge, and that human can ultimately decide to take an action for their own reasons or be compelled to by a government. And the only honest answer is that, you know, when compelled to, a company will follow what a government asks them to do. They don't have a choice. These are kind of the architecture level. Well, let's go a step up to applications. Discovery, or what is now known as search, but used to be discovery, is highly centralized. In most countries, Google has a very high market share. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Google's useful. I use it. The price of Google, the penalty of Google, is the things you don't see. If Google has a certain algorithm and for whatever reason that algorithm doesn't like a certain website topic, etc., it won't appear. Or it won't appear on the first page, or it won't appear in the first few pages. Quite frankly, if it doesn't appear in the first page, it's mostly like it doesn't exist. If it doesn't appear in the first few pages of Google search results, it definitely doesn't exist. So you could be there, you could be on the internet, but if an algorithm you have nothing to do with decides it doesn't like your website, it effectively does not exist for most people. Now, look, there's good reasons why the algorithm does these types of things. People try to spam Google, it's search engine optimization, and it's a cat and mouse game with the search engines. But as you've gotten to centralized, large market share providers, you get algorithmic risk. Like if search happened through 200 different algorithms, each with 0.5% market share, it wouldn't matter if one of them didn't like your website. And if almost all of them didn't like your website, well, there's probably a good reason. Right? Maybe your website's not that interesting to people, right? Like maybe it's correct that but when there's one, it's less diversified. It's more likely something will go wrong for non-substantive reasons. Communication platforms. Communication platforms have huge network effects. You want to go on Twitter because everyone else is on Twitter. You don't go on Twitter because it has 140 characters or 280 characters or what have you. I mean, that's trivially replicable. What's not replicable is that everyone else is on Twitter. And so, you know, Facebook is like the network for short form medium form communication, LinkedIn for kind of job seeking professional communication, Twitter for short form communication. All of them with very high market shares, all of them fairly centralized. And unlike the internet, you need Twitter's permission to be on Twitter. All of this endless arguing about which accounts should be banned, which accounts should be boosted, which accounts should appear in the search results on Twitter is a failure of architecture. We don't have this discussion about websites, we don't have it about email, because those are not centralized in the same way. Whereas on Twitter, whether you have an account or not depends on who the CEO is. And it doesn't matter who you think is right. Maybe Parag was making the right decisions. Maybe Elon's making the right decisions. The fact that there's a specific person whose views on content moderation you have to take into account is already the failure. It's irrelevant to me if Elon is more or less right than Parag. Totally irrelevant. There's no CEO of email, there's no CEO of the internet, but there is a CEO of our short messaging protocol. And that is a form of failure case. E-commerce is similar. Amazon has reasonable market share in e-commerce, eBay in its sector. Network effects are not quite as strong there, so it's not as bad. Payments, payments is tragic, right? Payments still effectively run through the fiat system, and they effectively run through a couple of payment processors. Internet native payments are cryptocurrencies. And they're there and they exist. And they're very, very important. And they're under constant some form of attack by the non-crypto ecosystem. And this is not to say that things don't go wrong in crypto, but there has yet to be, I think, a major stakeholder in the non-crypto world to come out and say, a government of an important country, to say, well, this is important for decentralization purposes. In fact, most of the governments think this is a downside of crypto. They would like to keep payments under their control. So you look at this in aggregate, and we're kind of coasting. Things have been getting worse. The internet of today is substantially more centralized than the internet of 1990 was. But it's gradual. It's one step at a time. Along the way, it gets more convenient. Along the way, it gets easier to use. Things load faster. You have more features and functionality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So nobody rebels because it's day-to-day activities getting better, while for existential reasons getting worse. I found an interesting draft paper from the IETF and their network working group on centralization and internet standards. And actually, it's a draft paper. It's not official. But I liked a couple of things that wrote so much that I just copy pasted them right into here. And I'm going to read them. So the internet's very nature is incompatible with the centralization of its functions. As a large, heterogeneous collection of interconnected systems, the internet is often characterized as a network of networks. These networks relate as peers who agree to facilitate communication rather than having a relationship of subservience to others' requirements and coercion by them. This focus on independence of action carries through the way the network is architected. For example, in the concept of an autonomous system. Second, the internet's first duty is to the end user. Allowing such power to be concentrated into few hands is counter to the IETF's mission of creating an internet that will, quote, help us build a better human society. When a third party has unavoidable access to communications, the, quote, informational and positional advantages gained can be used to observe behavior, the panopticon effect, and shape or even deny behavior, the choke point effect, which can be used by those parties or the states that have authority over them for coercive ends. I have nothing to add to this. I couldn't agree with this more. And then the paper goes on and lists 5 negative parts of the negative aspects of the concentration of power. Limiting innovation, which we discussed. Constraining competition, which is similar. The first and the second often go together. Reducing availability means that you're not building resilience and redundancy, and this could be because of unintended effects. So if you have one ISP and something happens in their facility and the whole internet for your country goes down inadvertently, that is a reduction of availability accidentally. But sometimes you have a reduction of availability, intentional. The Egypt Telecom example was an intentional reduction of availability. Creating monoculture. This is a limiting innovation point, but at the intellectual level. So this is if there's a certain set of values or principles that are acceptable to Facebook but not to others, and Facebook gets a dominant position on the internet, then we all have to go along with those sets of values, principles, forms of speech, what have you, where the world is a huge, diverse, heterogeneous place. We are not all alike at the individual, interest group, regional, national level. We should not all be alike. We should not all have to be in a certain way. But if we then have to run through a specific corporation, that corporation may, for a variety of reasons, on purpose or accidentally, voluntarily or coerced by others, forced to flatten out, squash that human diversity to fit it into a specific standard acceptable to that corporation. And it's very, very hard to say, I'm going to have a corporation that fully allows all of these differences to exist. For one, some of the differences are long-standing national disputes among nation states where certain countries will say, well, you have to say this, and you're not allowed to say that, and their neighbor will say the opposite. And since no company is in a position, a social media company is not in a position to solve all world conflicts, they have to take a position on this topic. And sometimes they're taking three different positions, right? Their position in country X and their position in country Y and their position in third countries, and all of them might be different, and they're trying to balance all these things. And the only reason they have to try and balance all these things is there is centralized choke point. And then the last one is self-reinforcement. And this is the advantages. These are the advantages that a certain service has by being in a dominant position. You see this in search. If you see all of people's search queries and then what they then click on, you're in a better position to build a better search engine than someone who doesn't. This is considered a big risk in artificial intelligence or machine learning, to use a technical term, that the more data you have, the better your model is. If your model is better, more people are going to want to use it. If more people use it, they'll give you more data, and it spirals. So each of these are pretty bad. And I don't even think these are the bad things. My greatest worry is democracy itself. And again, I'm going to sound strange. I grant you. I'm in a deep minority position here. I grant you that most people, and I think, I don't remember who I discussed this with, I think Chris Dixon. So there's like an interesting divide in the world is between people for whom the digital world is real and people for whom it's not. A lot of people, if I had this discussion with them, might say, well, I mean, what difference does it make what happens on Facebook? That's not real life. In fact, I could just close my Facebook account. My real life is my car, my house, my physical goods. And I deeply disagree with that, both today and in the future, because I don't know about you, but I spend the vast majority of my working hours looking at a computer screen. Your phone also being, a fairly powerful computer. So between my phone screen and my laptop screen and my desktop screen, I spend the large majority of my waking hours looking at these. And then sometimes I'll, rare occasions, take a break and, I don't know, watch a movie on Netflix on my TV, which is also a computer. Right? Any modern TV is also a computer as well. That is, operating through those same internet service providers who are in content delivery networks and centralized firms who are delivering your whatever you're seeing on your computer screen. And so my view is I already spent the majority of my life in the digital world, and quite frankly, the important things in my life, all of the things that I can afford in the physical world are downstream from my professional activities, which are all intermediated by the digital world. And I don't know if this has happened to you recently. It happened to me once a few years ago, pre-COVID, when I was in an office where everyone else was in the office, and the internet went out. And then we called our internet provider, and the internet provider said, yeah, it's going to be out all day. We spent a few minutes in New York. We spent a few minutes thinking about what to do. And we realized there was basically nothing we could do. We were worthless in the office without internet. Totally and completely worthless. It was shocking. And it was shocking to think about that, I don't know, about 25 years ago, something in that range, most offices did not have internet access. And so people would go to work and do whatever they were doing, and whatever they were doing did not include the internet. 30 years ago, effectively none did. And you were thinking about this, that what actually can you do in an office without internet? I mean, you couldn't send an email. You couldn't browse the web. Theoretically, you could make some calls, but our CRM was online, our customer relationship management system was online, so you couldn't record the calls or, in fact, find the people who you were supposed to call, because that was also online. We were literally worthless without internet. And so we picked up and went home, and this was, pre-COVID times and pre-remote work times, but we went and figured, well, whatever the downside is from working from home, it's 1,000 times better than being here together without internet. And then went a few days, and it was bracing, it was shocking. And I think basically everything is that way now, right? The large majority of people are dependent in some capacity on the internet to do anything. In which case, we already live in a digital world, and how we interact in a digital world and what is our governance and our architecture in a digital world is super important. And it's super important that we preserve the same models of governance that we have in the physical world and the digital world. I'll come to that in a second.